So, for all intents and purposes, we're going to call this review series the Disney Royalty Review just because it's easier to say than Disney Prince and Princess and or Princess. And with that in mind, we're going to start off with the first Disney royalty movie, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's hard to think that in 1937 there was no animated film that could be viewed as a good idea, as a marketable idea. And lo and behold, here we are now in the year of our Lord 2017, or current year, and animated films just kind of expected. Like, why would you not make an animated film? Not just in America, in Japan. I mean, Miyazaki has just starts cranking them out when as soon as he says he's going to retire. But coming back to Snow White, I think it's impressive that this film has still withstood the test of time. It's still a good film. I mean, in '89, the United States Library of Congress deemed the film culturally, historically, and aesthetically significant. And it's still one of the greatest American animated films of all time. Actually, it is the greatest animated film of all time, according to the National Film Registry in 2008. But looking at this film for what we are looking at it for, which is our prince and princess, it again lays down an amazing foundation that will be built upon to perfect our ideal Disney prince, Disney princess. And this isn't intended. All right, Walt loved fairy tales, but I don't think he ever intended to have this much planned or that this line would go through as far as it has. I mean, by the time he had died, we'd only had Snow White, Cinderella, and Sleeping Beauty. I mean, his last film was The Jungle Book. But coming on to this film as a whole and its relevance to the topic, it's interesting to note that this film really does put emphasis on not the character so much as our interactions with the character. And this makes sense for Walt. Because Walt Disney, if you look at a lot of his films, it's never really so much about the titular character. It's about the people interacting with that character. I mean, people don't really remember every bit of dialogue Snow White has, but they have plenty of funny moments with the Seven Dwarves. Mowgli's kind of the least interesting thing about the Jungle Book. It's Baloo, Bagheera, Shere Khan, King Louie, the elephants, Kaa. They're much more memorable than Mowgli is. And with that in mind, you have to again apply that to this. Snow White is interesting. She's this 14-year-old girl who, like her predecessors, is going to become to be viewed as sort of the best of humanity. She's a bit too pure for the world we live in. And this is true here. I mean, Snow White's a 14-year-old girl, and the evil queen just wants to kill her because the mirror says, oh, she's prettier than you, or she's more fair. And granted, this is a medieval society, but it's a medieval society. You should be used to this idea. But again, how everyone plays off of Snow White is totally important. The huntsman, or the woodsman, depending on how you hear it, who has been tasked to kill Snow White, he's about to, and then he can't bring himself to do it when she looks at him. It's looking at this face, this purity, you can't do it. So he sends her off to run through the forest like a chicken with her head cut off. As the forest comes to life, it's her imagination running away with her. And it just sort of, it again comes alive. Like everything starts to grab her. Her eyes get all weird because animation was a thing at the time. And at the end of that hysteria, she is welcomed by the woodland creatures, and that shows again a bit of her nature, that she's very welcoming, she's very, very pure of heart, which is sort of the idea that Gordy sort of brought up with why kids can hear animals, because they're the pure of heart. They don't just hear the sounds, they hear the words. And when she meets the seven dwarfs, their first instinct is to, well, we'll probably throw her out. But then they see her, and then they hear her talk, and they see how innocent she is, and how kind she is. And they're like, well, she has to stay. We have to keep her safe. and you go from there. And it's not just a matter of look; it's also attitude. I mean, when Snow White is told she can't let anyone in the house, or else any one of them could be the evil queen set to kill you. When when she sees the old beggar woman who we know is the evil queen, that idea of self-preservation goes out of the window when she sees the woman being attacked. There's a certain amount of principle she has that people need help, people need to be protected. She believes that, and she lives it. She looks after the seven dwarfs like her own children. And she has a very simplistic goal and dream, really. There's no huge pile of gold. There's no dream of being queen. She wants love. She wants the person she loves to find her. And that segues into our prince. Prince Florian. Yes, he has a name. Florian is his actual name. Prince Charming is a terrible name. Never do that again, people. Prince Charming is a terrible name. There's only one Charming, and that's the dude from Shrek. And he's hilariously terrible. But where Snow White has a amazing position as the template for the ideal princess archetype that will be improved upon later, Florian doesn't have that luxury. He's a template. Make no mistake, he is a template. And he will go on to set the groundwork for a much more slowly developing character idea that won't be perfected, or at least begin to show real effort until the Disney Renaissance era, or at least officially. I'm going to talk about at least two characters who I think are not Disney princes in the conventional sense, but I do think really highlight the importance of where these characters can go. But going back to Florian, he's just sort of there, and he's barely there. The story was that Walt didn't like how Florian looked on screen, so a lot of his scenes were cut. A lot of things were cut from the original Snow White film. It was supposed to have an ending more in line with the fairy tale. She actually dies instead of falls asleep. They carry her up, she falls down, apple bit falls out of her mouth, she's alive, and so on and so forth. But with Florian, he's just kind of there, as I said before, and this is because of the decision to cut things out. In the original film, Florian would be kidnapped by the evil Queen's men, or her skeleton army. She actually had a skeleton army, and that's insane. And she would say, like, you're going to marry me when this is all over, and it's very Cersei Lannister to an extent. And Florian would free himself as the evil queen leaves under the guise of the wretched old hag woman, and he would fight his way through the skeleton army just like a badass, like a badass, and just be so awesome. And then he would find Snow White, he would kiss her, she would wake up, and we go on from there. Now, going on to their relationship, the relationship between Snow White and Florian, it should be noted that, as far as I can tell, going by this isn't the first time they meet. Which is a big criticism of a lot of Disney films, like, they fall in love as soon as they meet. And there's been a good argument about that, but for this particular film, it kind of comes off as, when Snow White sings, that she's met him before, because remember, she's saying she's wishing for the one she loves to find him today. So either she's hoping that, she'll find someone who she'll love, or she's hoping that this person she's been enamored with will make a move. And that makes sense. I mean, she's a 14-year-old girl from a very conservative time period. Like, women were not expected to make such bold claims of love at that point, especially in the time frame of the film. And Florian does try to make the move, but she is shy, and she's a bit insecure about her clothes too, which I think is an interesting, well, not an interesting take, more of a realistic take on it. I mean, we've all met people, girls in particular, who are very insecure about how they're dressed in this particular moment in time. There's a moment that she wants to create that cannot happen here. And with Florian, he's just kind of there. He really only exists to save Snow White. He exists to be the object of Snow White's affections, and then he exists to save her. And he has next to no dialogue. He really doesn't. Like, if you think he has a bit of dialogue in the beginning of the film, he sort of interjects himself into the song, which is a fun thing Disney likes to do, especially this time period. And then she runs off into a room, and they have a little flirt moment, but there's no dialogue at that point. And then he shows up at the end. He doesn't say anything, and Snow White's the only person that seems to actually interact with him in any way, shape, or form. But this is Snow White's victory. I mean, the evil queen is dead. She's not dead. She gets the prince, and it's a bit of a nitpick. But Florian has nothing to do. He has no goals or objectives that really help him flesh himself out. And I'm pretty lenient with that, primarily because this is our first animated feature film. I mean, this is something that, again, has never happened before. No precedent. So we have to give the ground where needed. And so, going off a bit of a little fun tangent before we continue, I want to talk about the other Snow White movie. Other Snow White movie? Not the live action one. Oh no. Oh no. This is done by Filmation Studios. And oh my god, is it terrible. And it's not terrible in a no one should ever made this. There's a clear intent to make this something great, at least in conception. But this was designed by Filmation Studios to be a sequel to Disney's Snow White. Now that was never going to happen. Whoever thought of that idea had lost their mind. Because Disney brought the Disney hammer down, and they couldn't even use the 7 dwarves. Alright, they didn't even use dwarves, they used dwarf elves. But in this film, it's, again, the sequel to the original. They're getting ready to get married. They're going to go find the 7 dwarves to invite them to the wedding. And the prince, I'm not calling him Florian, he hasn't earned that name, is kidnapped by Lord Malice. Because this was from that era where we can't be subtle with bad guy names. And Lord Malice is the evil queen's brother. Bum bum bum. And we would later repeat this really stupid idea with Disney in The Little Mermaid 2. Ursula's crazy sister. But going on here, what made this film sort of stand out was this time Snow White is given the role of protagonist, and she's taking an active role in the series, and she has never been more boring. Her design is great. Like, a lot of designs in this film are not groundbreaking, but they're unique in that they really imply a progression of time. Snow White's hair is longer. She's wearing a more mature dress, not revealing, but it looks like something someone wears when they get older. But that's kind of it. Like, Snow White here doesn't do anything of any merit. She doesn't really inspire people. And this one, our cast is not just Snow White and Lord Malice. But we also have a Dom DeLuise magic mirror, which took away any dignity from a Disney film. I mean, dear God, I love Dom DeLuise, just not in this thing. He was much better in anything else. Like, even a Troll in Central Park, and I'll cross that bridge eventually. All Dogs Go to Heaven, An American Tail, great Dom DeLuise moments. But here there's a lack of dignity and simplicity, and even the fun innocence of Snow White. And this is best shown in the 7 dwarf elves. Because, as I said, they could not use the 7 dwarves. So they flipped the script and brought in the 7 dwarf elves, the 7 cousins of the 7 dwarves. The 7 dwarves had opened up a new mine in the next kingdom. Industry, people. Industry is the key. And these dwarf elves, it's like the Chipettes, these dwarf elves have been given a really important job. They've been chosen by Mother Nature to, quote-unquote, be there when she can't. And my question was always, what is Mother Nature doing that is so important that you can't do your job? So the 7 dwarf elves are each given a power to protect an aspect of nature, and it's kind of vague. Like our Doc knockoff is Muddy, and she's in charge of the earth itself, and we often find her bathing in mud. She can make earthquakes, and I just have there's the character Sunbeam, who is the grumpy knockoff, and she's in charge of sunlight, or maybe the sun. We'd have to say sun because she was able to dry up Muddy's mud hole that she was bathing in for no real reason. There's Critterina, who was in charge of all the animals in nature, and then there's characters like Moonbeam, who is in charge of night, but she sleepwalks. She's the epitome of a sleep. She's sleepy level 10, sleepy level 10, because she sleepwalks and she's only awake at night, and we have no idea what her powers are. The only real character of merit in this is the dwarf Thunderella, and her power is, I'm guessing she's the dopey knockoff. Her power is over the weather, and it's really interesting watching her try to create a thunderstorm, like a really small thunderstorm, but she's afraid of thunder, and I thought that was interesting. It's a sort of a cliche thing, like, this scared kid finds their courage and steps into this new role, but it's such a simple and fun idea, and she really does sort of live in the shadow of her much, I guess, older sisters that are the dwarf elves. But it's so weird because it doesn't seem like she wants the job, but Mother Nature kind of drafted her into it, and she's taking it seriously. But I think we're going off on a bit of a tangent here. Like, we're talking about two different films, but I talked about it because I felt that what the original Snow White film did that this sequel did wrong was that it became too in love with its side characters and lost the fact this is supposed to be the story of Snow White saving the prince, and she doesn't really do that. It's the dwarf elves that do most of the work. Compare this to Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, where yes, it is the dwarves that kill the evil queen. It all goes back to Snow White. Like, everything goes back to Snow White, and I feel that the sequel doesn't quite do that right. And also how Snow White in the Seven Dwarfs is still a more capable character, even though stuff is happening to her and she's not really being proactive, where this one implies to be proactive but then isn't. And also, the prince does next to nothing. The prince actually does less than nothing in the Filmation version. But wrapping this up, we're going to talk about exactly who we're going to wrap up Snow White and Florian, and then we're going to talk about who I think their best parallels are. And it's going to be pretty lazy who these parallels are. But Snow White is the epitome of that Disney spark idea. It's no coincidence that she's a little girl, basically, this inspiration for people to do good, to be the best you can, be the best person you can be. And don't let your inner beauty take precedent, take a back seat to your outer beauty. Being a good person is way more important than anything else. I mean, look, the evil queen has one supporter that we can see, and it's the huntsman who later betrays her. The seven dwarfs live in her kingdom, and they don't like her. Like, they know everything about. They know she's not a good person, so they don't help her. And they don't. It's just that concept that Snow White is such a good person that people want to help her. Florian is a work in progress, and it seems that the only reason he wasn't given more is just due to the restraints of the time period. And we'll see that with Florian, that the next two films are going to try to really rectify that as best and as slowly as possible. But again, these films have not quite gotten the multi-story aspect just right yet, or at least a story that can remain somewhat independent of its titular character. And going on to the parallels, the best examples I can still think of to this day of Snow White is the Once Upon a Time version of Snow White. And it's a bit awkward because I have a complex relationship with Once Upon a Time. It's not even complex, I just don't like it anymore. But I felt that Mary Margaret's character, when it was done right, was the modern day Snow White that I think we're all kind of waiting for. She is proactive. She has this amazing faith and happily ever after and true love that guides her through it. It guides her through the things she goes through. people don't just want to help her; they rally behind her. And the idea behind Snow White is you can't break her. And I think that this portrayal in Once Upon a Time does captures that just well. David, who is the parallel I'm going to use for Florian, yeah, I'm low hanging fruit here, low hanging fruit. I think sums up my problems with Florian in that we don't know much about him. At one point, he says that I don't want to be remembered. I don't want to only be remembered as a man who kissed a sleeping princess awake 30 years ago. And that says a lot about the direction they sort of wanted to go. He's almost we can call him a useless counterpart to Florian, but he's very aware that his character, and even not just who he's based off of, but just sort of his own purpose, is just kind of there. But David tries. Like he's trying to create a legacy for himself. He's trying to create something that people will look back on and say, "Hey, yeah, David, he kissed the princess awake, but he also did X and Y," and he tries to be um, sort of worthy of it. He wants to be a knight. He has a really sort of small subplot, and sort of like what best sums up David's character in Once Upon a Time: small subplots in the story. Because I'm not saying that Once Upon a Time is very female focused, because it is, and that isn't a bad thing. But I do feel that it's sort of coming at the sacrifice of some of these characters. Um, Florian doesn't have David doesn't have magic here, but he's always out there. He's always out there putting out the best effort. He's always there trying to help, and he's a dedicated character to the idea of love and, well, his wife and his family. And he at one point was the sheriff of Storybrooke. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, David is useless counterpart is kind of the best way to describe him, but it's not his fault. Like, the actor does a great job. Like, it's very, like, the only weak actor in Once Upon a Time is Emma Swan's actress, and I'll say it, she has trouble emoting. Everyone else does a great job, and David is no is no exception. But with that in mind, we're going to bring this video to a close. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the movie, the prince, the princess, and that little tangent went off on about the Filmation Studios version. And this is the Bug, a think tank, signing off. May your fandom serve you well.